Derek Moss had built his life on precision. 20 years in military intelligence, followed by a decade running his private security consulting firm, had taught him that information was power and patience was a weapon. His meticulously maintained home in the affluent suburb of Millfield reflected this philosophy. Every detail planned, every contingency considered. At 45, Derek possessed the lean build of a man who still ran 5 miles every morning, and the calculating gray eyes of someone who missed nothing. His wife, Brianna, had once called those eyes mysterious. Now, as he watched her through his home office window, he realized she'd simply mistaken caution for mystique. Brianna was in the garden with their twins, 16-year-old Cole and Chloe, ostensibly helping them with a school project about native plants. But Derek noticed how she kept checking her phone, how her smile seemed forced, how she'd grown distant over the past 6 months. He'd noticed everything. The marriage had been solid for 18 years. Brianna, a former marketing executive who'd become a stay-at-home mother, had been his anchor during his transition from military to civilian life. She understood his need for structure, his difficulty expressing emotion, his periodic nightmares from missions he couldn't discuss. In return, he'd provided stability, security, and unwavering loyalty. But something had shifted. Derek's first clue came from his own security system. He'd installed high-end cameras throughout their property, ostensibly for protection, but they also tracked patterns. Brianna's movements had become erratic. Unexplained absences, new routes to the grocery store that took twice as long, phone calls she took in the basement. The second clue was Cole. Their son had always been Derek's pride. Analytical, disciplined, planning to follow his father into the military. But lately, Cole had been asking pointed questions about loyalty, about what someone should do when they knew a secret that could hurt someone they loved. The boy's moral compass was being tested by something he'd observed. Derek had spent 3 weeks gathering intelligence before confirming his suspicions. Brianna was having an affair with Trevor Holt, the recently elected county judge. Holt was a prominent figure. Handsome, charismatic, and married to the daughter of a former governor. He was also Derek's client. 6 months ago, Judge Holt had hired Derek's firm to conduct security assessments for the courthouse. It was during one of these consultations that Holt had met Brianna, who'd accompanied Derek to a judicial fundraiser. The irony wasn't lost on him. His own client was destroying his marriage. But Derek Moss didn't react with the hot fury of a betrayed husband. Instead, he activated the cold, methodical mindset that had made him one of the military's most effective intelligence operatives. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. And in war, victory belonged to whoever planned better and struck harder. The plan began to form during his evening runs through the neighborhood. Derek had always been a strategist, but this required something deeper, a psychological campaign that would destroy not just the affair, but the very foundations of his enemies' lives. He wouldn't simply expose them. He would engineer their complete downfall, using their own weaknesses against them. His first move was seemingly minor. Derek began documenting everything, not just the affair, but the entire ecosystem around it. He used his professional resources to conduct deep background investigations on both Brianna and Holt. Every financial transaction, every communication, every connection, nothing escaped his notice. He was building a comprehensive intelligence picture, but more importantly, he was looking for pressure points. What he discovered exceeded his expectations. Judge Holt wasn't just betraying his marriage. He was reckless, arrogant, and surprisingly careless about the ethical boundaries of his position. Derek's security work had given him access to the courthouse systems, and he began to notice patterns suggesting Holt was using his position inappropriately, not for financial gain but for personal favors and political maneuvering. More intriguingly, Derek realized that Brianna wasn't just a passive participant in the affair. She was actively facilitating it, using her social connections and Derek's own professional network to provide Holt with information that gave him advantages in cases and political situations. She was, in essence, trading Derek's secrets to fund her own betrayal. As Derek compiled his intelligence, he made a chilling decision. This wouldn't be about forgiveness or reconciliation. This was about total destruction. Brianna and Holt had declared war the moment they betrayed his trust, and Derek Moss had never lost a war. The most painful discovery came when he realized that Chloe knew about the affair and was helping her mother maintain the deception. His own daughter, whom he'd raised to value honor and integrity, had chosen to betray him for the promise of a more exciting life with Judge Holt, who had apparently been filling her head with stories about traveling the world and attending elite social events. Only Cole remained loyal, and Derek could see the boy's internal struggle. Cole knew his family was fracturing, but he didn't know how to choose sides without destroying everything he'd believed about his parents. Derek's plan crystallized around a simple principle. His enemies would destroy themselves, and he would merely provide the opportunity. 3 months after confirming the affair, Derek began implementing his strategy. The beauty of his plan lay in its subtlety. Every move would appear natural, even beneficial to his targets, until it was too late for them to escape. His first objective was to separate Cole from the women who had betrayed him. Derek began spending more time with his son, taking him on weekend trips and sharing stories from his military service that emphasized the importance of loyalty and the consequences of betrayal. Cole was bright enough to understand the subtext, and Derek watched his son's resolve strengthen. "Dad," Cole said during a camping trip, "what would you do if someone you trusted completely lied to you about something really important?" Derek studied his son's face in the firelight. "Depends on the lie, Cole. Small lies are human nature. Big lies that hurt innocent people, those require consequences. Even if the person was family, especially if they're family. Family betrayal cuts deepest because it violates the most sacred trust." Cole nodded slowly, and Derek knew his son had made his choice. Meanwhile, Derek was orchestrating a more complex campaign against Brianna and Holt. He'd identified their primary weakness: arrogance. Both believed they were smarter than everyone around them, and that confidence would be their downfall. Derek began feeding Holt carefully crafted information during their security consultations. He shared details about high-profile cases, security vulnerabilities, and political intelligence, all designed to make Holt feel like he had insider access to information that could advance his career. Holt, in turn, was sharing this information with Brianna, who was using it in her social circles to position herself as well-connected and influential. What neither realized was that Derek was creating a paper trail. Every piece of information he shared was tagged, traceable, and would eventually form a pattern that would expose their collusion. More importantly, Derek was encouraging them to take increasingly risky actions based on this intelligence. The judge began making decisions that, while not obviously corrupt, showed he had access to information he shouldn't possess. Derek documented every instance, building a case that would eventually demonstrate a clear pattern of ethical violations. Simultaneously, Derek was positioning himself as the perfect husband and father in public. He increased his charitable activities, took on high-profile security contracts that put him in the local news, and made sure everyone in their social circle saw him as devoted to his family. This wasn't just for appearances, it was preparation for what was coming. The psychological pressure on Brianna began to show. She started making mistakes, becoming careless about covering her tracks. Derek encouraged this by subtly increasing the stress in their home life, weaving tension into everyday interactions. He would mention suspicious phone calls, express concern about her late nights, and ask pointed questions about her activities. Not enough to confirm he knew about the affair, but enough to make her paranoid. Brianna responded by becoming more aggressive in her deception. She began accusing Derek of being controlling and paranoid, laying the groundwork for what Derek suspected would eventually become allegations of emotional abuse. She was unknowingly playing directly into his strategy. Derek's most masterful manipulation involved the children. He began documenting every interaction, every conversation, every family moment. When Brianna was absent for important events, which happened increasingly often due to her affair, Derek made sure to create detailed records of her priorities. When she chose time with Holt over Cole's school events or Chloe's activities, Derek quietly documented her absence. He also began recording conversations in his home. The system was sophisticated, triggered by voice activation, and completely legal since it was his property. These recordings captured Brianna's lies to the children, her manipulative behavior, and most damning, her coaching Chloe to maintain the deception. The breakthrough came when Derek realized that Holt was planning to leave his wife. The judge had been having conversations with a divorce attorney, and through his professional network, Derek learned that Holt intended to time his divorce to coincide with Derek and Brianna's split. The plan was for them to move in together immediately, presenting their relationship as a romance that began after both divorces. This intelligence allowed Derek to adjust his timeline. Instead of waiting for them to make the first move, he would force their hand while they were still unprepared. Derek hired his own attorney, not a divorce lawyer, but a criminal defense specialist named Victoria Pine, known for her ruthless tactics and perfect record in high-stakes cases. He briefed her on everything he'd discovered, presenting it not as a divorce case, but as a potential criminal conspiracy involving judicial corruption and abuse of classified security information. Pine's assessment was chilling in its precision. You have enough to destroy both of them professionally and personally. The question is how far you want to go. All the way, Derek replied without hesitation. They declared war on my family. I'm going to finish it. The final piece of Derek's trap was perhaps the most devious. He began deliberately creating situations where Brianna would feel compelled to escalate the conflict. He started asking more questions about her schedule, expressing concern about her behavior around the children, and suggesting she might benefit from counseling. Each action was carefully calibrated to provoke a defensive response while maintaining his position as a concerned husband. Brianna took the bait. Within weeks, she was telling friends that Derek was becoming controlling and paranoid, that she was afraid of what he might do, and that she was concerned for her safety and the children's well-being. Derek documented every false accusation, every manipulative conversation, and every attempt to turn their social circle against him. When the time came to spring his trap, he would have a complete record of her deception. As winter approached, Derek made his final preparations. He had identified the optimal moment to act, calculated every possible response from his enemies, and prepared contingencies for scenarios he hoped wouldn't be necessary. The war was about to begin, and Derek Moss intended to win it completely. Spring brought the opening battle. Derek had spent months preparing for this moment, and when it came, it unfolded with the precision of a military operation. The trigger was a family dinner in early April. Derek had been monitoring Brianna's communications and knew she was planning to spend the weekend with Holt at a resort 3 hours away, using a girls' trip as her cover story. More importantly, he learned that Holt intended to use the weekend to propose, planning to present their relationship as a fairy tale romance once they were both divorced. Derek chose that Friday evening to make his first overt move. "Brianna," he said as they sat down to dinner with the twins, "I've been thinking about our marriage lately, about trust, loyalty, and what family really means." Brianna's fork paused halfway to her mouth. That's a heavy topic for dinner conversation. Heavy topics require honest discussion. Derek's voice remained calm, but Cole immediately recognized the tone from their camping trips. "I've realized that our family has been operating under some fundamental misunderstandings about honesty." Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had been dreading this moment for months, knowing that eventually her father's analytical nature would uncover what she'd been helping to hide. "I think we should all commit to complete honesty moving forward," Derek continued. "No more secrets, no more lies, no more deception. Everyone should have the opportunity to make choices based on the truth." "Derek, what are you talking about?" Brianna's attempt at innocent confusion was well practiced, but Derek could see the panic in her eyes. "I'm talking about respect, Brianna, about the respect family members owe each other." He turned to Cole. "Son, would you say this family has been operating with complete honesty?" Cole looked at his mother, then his sister, then back to his father. The weight of months of secret knowledge was evident in his expression. "No, sir." "I wouldn't say that." "Cole," Chloe snapped, her voice tense, "you don't know what you're talking about." "Actually, I think he does." Derek's gaze moved to his daughter. "Chloe, would you like to share what you know about honesty in this family?" The teenager's face flushed red. She looked down, fidgeting with her napkin, the silence heavy and expectant. She'd inherited her mother's temper along with her beauty, and both were now on full display. "This is ridiculous. You're interrogating us like we're criminals." "I'm asking questions that deserve answers," Derek replied, his tone level. "Simple questions about truth and loyalty." Brianna stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not going to sit here and listen to this paranoid inquisition. You've been acting strange for months, Derek. Suspicious, controlling, asking questions about everything I do. It's not healthy. Sit down, Brianna." The command was quiet, but it carried 20 years of military authority. Brianna found herself sitting before she consciously decided to comply. "I've been asking questions because I've noticed changes in our family dynamic. Changes that suggest some people aren't being truthful about their priorities and commitments." Derek turned to Chloe. "For instance, your mother has missed 4 of Cole's baseball games this season, 3 school events that she previously considered important, and approximately 2/3 of our family dinners. Would you say those absences reflect someone who's committed to this family?" "People get busy," Chloe said defensively. "Mom has her own life." "Yes, she does. The question is whether that life includes honesty about what she's busy doing." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek could see the calculation in Brianna's eyes as she weighed her options. She was realizing that her careful deception might not have been as effective as she believed. "I think we should discuss this privately," Brianna said finally. "I think we should discuss it as a family. After all, if we're going to commit to honesty, everyone should understand what's been hidden and what choices need to be made." Derek reached into his jacket pocket and placed a manila envelope on the table. It was thin, innocuous, but Brianna's eyes fixed on it with the intensity of a trapped animal spotting a predator. "What's that?" she whispered. "Information. The kind of information that helps people make informed decisions about their futures. You've been spying on me. I've been observing my family and documenting changes in behavior patterns. It's what I do professionally. Analyze security threats and assess risks. What I discovered is that this family faces some significant security vulnerabilities. Derek opened the envelope and withdrew a single photograph. It showed Brianna and Judge Holt leaving a restaurant together, her hand on his arm, both laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. The timestamp indicated it was taken 6 weeks earlier during one of her supposed shopping trips. Chloe gasped. Cole stared at the photo, his suspicions finally confirmed. Brianna's face went white. "You jerk," she breathed. "I'm a jerk for documenting betrayal?" Derek asked, his voice clinical. Interesting perspective. What's particularly interesting is that this represents just one small piece of a much larger pattern of deception, one that extends beyond simple marital infidelity. Derek withdrew a second document, a timeline showing the correlation between Brianna's meetings with Holt and specific decisions the judge had made in high-profile cases. Derek had been feeding Holt information, and this timeline showed how that information had influenced judicial outcomes. You see, when someone betrays their family, it's rarely an isolated incident. It's usually part of a broader pattern of ethical flexibility that extends into other areas of life. Brianna stood again, this time with more determination. "I'm not listening to this. Your paranoid obsession with control has poisoned this family. The children can see it." "Actually, Mom," Cole interrupted quietly, "I think Dad's been pretty clear about what he's asking for. Just honesty." Chloe shot her brother a venomous look. "You don't understand anything." "I understand loyalty," Cole replied, "and I understand that Dad has never lied to us." The kitchen erupted in shouting as Brianna began hurling accusations of control, manipulation, and emotional harm. Chloe joined in, defending her mother and attacking Derek's character. But Derek noticed that Cole remained calm, watching the scene with the analytical detachment Derek had taught him. "Enough." Derek's single word cut through the chaos. "Brianna, you have choices to make. You can continue this deception, escalate these false accusations, and force me to reveal everything I know about your activities. Or you can choose honesty and discuss how we want to handle this situation moving forward." "You're threatening me." "I'm offering you the opportunity to maintain some dignity in an impossible situation, but that opportunity has an expiration date." Brianna grabbed her purse and keys. "I'm leaving. When you're ready to act like a reasonable human being instead of some paranoid dictator, you can call me." "Where will you be staying?" Derek asked calmly. The question caught her off guard. She'd planned to meet Holt at the resort, but admitting that now would confirm everything Derek suspected. I'll be at my sister's." "I'll need to verify that for insurance purposes. You understand?" Brianna's hand froze on the door handle. Derek was telling her that he would check her story, that any lie would be discovered and documented. She was beginning to understand that her husband was several moves ahead of her in a game she hadn't realized she was playing. "Fine, I'll call you tomorrow when I've had time to think." After she left, Derek turned to his children. Cole was staring at the documents on the table. Chloe was crying, but Derek could see anger mixed with her tears. "Dad," Chloe said, "you destroyed our family." "No, sweetheart. I documented the destruction of our family. There's a difference. You could have talked to Mom privately. You could have tried to work things out." Derek studied his daughter's face, seeing Brianna's features but hoping for some trace of his own values. "Chloe, when someone betrays you completely, there are no private conversations that can fix it. There are only consequences and choices about what comes next." "I hate you," she whispered. "I know, but someday you'll understand that sometimes people you love make choices that force you to choose between your loyalty to them and your loyalty to your principles. I chose my principles. That night, Derek called Victoria Pine. Phase 1 is complete. Brianna will be filing for divorce within the week, and she'll be requesting a restraining order based on allegations of emotional abuse and controlling behavior. How can you be certain? Because it's what I would do in her position. She needs to establish herself as the victim before I can present evidence that she's the aggressor. The restraining order will give her legal protection and public sympathy. And you're prepared for that? Derek looked at the envelope of documents he'd prepared for the court hearing. It contained evidence that would not only refute Brianna's allegations, but would initiate a criminal investigation into Judge Holt's judicial misconduct and Brianna's role in facilitating it. I've been preparing for this for 6 months, Victoria. By the time I'm finished, Brianna and Holt won't just lose this legal battle. They'll lose everything they care about. And your children? Derek was quiet for a long moment. Cole will understand. Chloe. He paused. Chloe made her choice when she chose to help her mother deceive me. In war, there are casualties, even when those casualties are people you love. As Derek hung up the phone, he felt the familiar cold focus that had served him well. In military operations, the enemy had been engaged. The battlefield was set, and soon the real war would begin. Brianna filed for divorce and requested a restraining order exactly 1 week after their confrontation, just as Derek had predicted. But her petition exceeded even his expectations for vindictive creativity. According to the court documents, Derek was a controlling and emotionally abusive husband who had systematically isolated Brianna from friends and family, monitored her movements obsessively, and created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation in their home. The petition claimed he had threatened her during their last conversation, and that she was in fear for her safety and the safety of the children. Most damaging were Brianna's allegations about Derek's military background and current work. She painted him as a potentially dangerous individual with extensive weapons training and access to surveillance equipment, who had been exhibiting increasingly paranoid and controlling behavior consistent with psychological instability. The petition requested full custody of both children, exclusive use of the family home, maximum spousal support, and a comprehensive restraining order that would prevent Derek from contacting her or coming within 500 feet of her, the children, or their home. Derek read the petition in Victoria Pine's office with the same clinical detachment he'd once applied to enemy intelligence reports. She's good, he admitted. Every allegation is technically defensible while being completely misleading. The surveillance equipment claim could be problematic, Victoria noted. Judges don't like the idea of electronic monitoring in domestic situations. Which is why I documented the installation of every system and obtained written consent from all family members, including Brianna. Derek produced a file folder. I also have recordings of family discussions where everyone, including Brianna, praised the security measures for making them feel safer. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You recorded family conversations? In my own home, with the systems I openly installed in common areas where no one had a reasonable expectation of privacy, completely legal. Derek's smile was cold. Brianna actually suggested upgrading the system after a neighbor's house was burglarized last year. What about the allegations of controlling behavior? Derek handed her a second folder, significantly thicker than the first. Complete documentation of my activities for the past 18 months. Work schedules, travel records, social engagements, family events. You'll find that I attended every school function, every family dinner, and every social obligation. Meanwhile, Brianna missed 40% of family commitments over the same period. The children's statements will be crucial. What do you expect from them? Derek's expression hardened. Cole will tell the truth. Chloe, He paused. Chloe will support her mother's version of events. She's been coached extensively on what to say. That could be devastating in a custody hearing. Only if we let it go to a traditional custody hearing. But I don't intend to play defense, Victoria. By the time I'm finished, Brianna won't be in a position to seek custody of anyone. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. Derek spent the week implementing the next phase of his strategy, which focused on Judge Holt. Derek had continued his security consulting work at the courthouse throughout the escalating domestic crisis, and his professional relationship with Holt provided the perfect cover for his intelligence gathering. The judge, believing himself secure in his deception, had become increasingly careless about hiding his affair and his use of insider information. Derek's surveillance had revealed that Holt was planning to expedite his own divorce proceedings to coincide with Brianna's legal action. The judge intended to present their relationship as a romance that had blossomed after both had ended their respective marriages, rather than the betrayal that had destroyed two families. More significantly, Derek had documented Holt's use of privileged information in several high-profile cases. The judge had been leveraging Derek's security assessments to make decisions that favored his political allies and personal interests, creating a pattern of judicial misconduct that bordered on corruption. Derek's plan was elegant in its simplicity. He would allow Brianna to present her false allegations at the restraining order hearing, then systematically destroy her credibility by exposing the true nature of her relationship with Holt and the judge's abuse of his position. The hearing would serve as the public unveiling of evidence that would trigger multiple investigations and destroy both Brianna and Holt professionally, financially, and socially. 3 days before the hearing, Derek received an unexpected visitor at his temporary apartment. Cole had convinced Chloe to meet with their father, ostensibly to discuss visitation arrangements, but Derek suspected his son had an ulterior motive. "Dad," Chloe said as they sat in his sparse living room, "I want you to know that I'm going to testify about what really happened in our family. I understand. I'm going to tell them about your surveillance, about how you made Mom feel trapped, about how you turned our house into a prison." Derek studied his daughter's face, seeing the coached words and rehearsed resentment. "Is that what you really believe happened?" "It's what I know happened," Chloe insisted. Cole interjected. "Dad never restricted anything Mom wanted to do. He just asked questions when she started acting weird. He spied on her," Chloe snapped. "He noticed when she started lying constantly and staying out all night," Cole shot back. "There's a difference." Derek held up a hand to stop the argument. "Chloe, you're going to say what you believe is true. I understand that. But I want you to know that when you testify, you'll be under oath. Perjury is a felony that can result in criminal charges, even for minors in certain circumstances." "Are you threatening me?" Chloe's voice trembled. "I'm reminding you that courts take truth seriously and that lies have consequences. I'm also reminding you that I have extensive documentation of everything that's happened in our family, including conversations where you discussed your mother's relationship with Judge Holt." Chloe's face went pale. She had assumed her father's surveillance was limited to tracking her mother's activities. The realization that he might have recorded her own participation in the deception was clearly terrifying. "You recorded me?" "I recorded conversations in common areas of my home, where family members discussed family matters. Everything I recorded is legal evidence that can be presented in court." Derek reached for his laptop and played a brief audio clip. It was Chloe's voice, unmistakably coaching her mother on how to explain her late return from a supposed shopping trip. "Remember, Mom, tell Dad the mall was crowded and you had trouble finding parking, and that you ran into Mrs. Henderson and talked for like an hour. He won't check that story because he doesn't like her husband." The recording continued with Brianna praising Chloe for her quick thinking and discussing how to maintain their story if Derek asked follow-up questions. Chloe stared at the laptop in horror. "You can't use that." "Actually, I can, and I will if necessary. The question is whether it will be necessary." Derek closed the laptop and leaned forward. "Chloe, I understand that you believe you were protecting your mother. I understand that you thought you were helping someone you love navigate a difficult situation, but what you were actually doing was facilitating the destruction of our family through deception and betrayal. Mom deserves to be happy. At the expense of everyone else? At the expense of lies, manipulation, and fraud." "Fraud?" Chloe echoed, confused. Derek realized his daughter had no idea how deep the conspiracy had gone. She thought she was simply helping her mother hide an affair, not participating in a scheme that involved judicial corruption and abuse of classified information. "Chloe, your mother's relationship with Judge Holt goes far beyond a simple affair. She's been providing him with confidential information from my security work. Information he's used to influence legal decisions and advance his political career. What you've been helping to hide isn't just betrayal. It's criminal conspiracy." Chloe looked to Cole, who nodded grimly. "I figured it out last month when I overheard Mom on the phone with Holt discussing a case Dad had worked on. She was telling him about security vulnerabilities in the courthouse that weren't supposed to be public knowledge." Chloe struggled to process the implications. That's really illegal, isn't it?" "Very illegal," Derek confirmed. "And anyone who knowingly participated in hiding that information could be considered an accessory." The teenager sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that her mother's romantic adventure was actually a criminal enterprise that could destroy multiple lives, including her own. "What happens now?" she whispered. "That depends on what you choose to say in court. If you testify truthfully about what you know, you'll be helping to expose serious crimes and protect other potential victims. If you lie under oath to protect criminals, you'll be committing a crime yourself." Derek stood and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where he'd raised his children for 16 years. "I want you to understand something, Chloe. I don't want to hurt you or your mother, but I will not allow myself to be destroyed by lies, and I will not allow criminal behavior to continue unchecked just because it's being committed by people I once loved." Once loved. Derek turned back to his daughter, and she saw something in his eyes that made her understand for the first time that her father was not going to forgive or forget what had been done to him. "Love without loyalty is just sentiment, Chloe, and sentiment is a luxury I can no longer afford." As his children left that evening, Derek knew the battle lines were finally drawn. In 2 days, the real war would begin, and by the time it ended, everyone involved would understand the price of betraying Derek Moss. The restraining order hearing drew a packed courtroom. Word had spread through the legal community that Judge Trevor Holt was presiding over a domestic case involving his security consultant, and the potential for conflict of interest had attracted attorneys, reporters, and courthouse staff eager to witness the proceedings. Derek sat beside Victoria Pine at the defendant's table, his military bearing evident in his straight posture and steady gaze. Across the aisle, Brianna clutched her attorney's arm while casting fearful glances in Derek's direction, a performance carefully crafted to support her allegations of intimidation. Judge Holt took the bench with his usual confident manner, but Derek noticed the slight tension around his eyes. The judge was walking a tightrope, needing to appear impartial while protecting the woman he intended to marry, and the secret that could destroy his career. "This is a hearing on a petition for a temporary restraining order filed by Brianna Moss against her husband, Derek Moss," Holt announced. "Mrs. Moss, you may present your evidence." Brianna's attorney, Robert Shunn, was a competent family law practitioner known for his aggressive tactics in custody disputes. His opening statement painted Derek as a controlling military man whose obsession with security and surveillance had created a climate of fear in the family home. Your Honor, Mrs. Moss has been married to a man whose professional expertise in intelligence and surveillance has poisoned their domestic relationship. Mr. Moss has turned their home into a military compound, monitoring his wife's every movement, questioning her activities, and creating detailed documentation of her daily life that crosses the line from protection into persecution. Shun presented phone records showing Derek's calls to verify Brianna's whereabouts, receipts from a private investigator, actually Derek's own surveillance activities, and testimony about the home security system that recorded conversations in violation of privacy. Mrs. Moss lives in constant fear that her husband is watching, listening, and documenting her every action. This behavior has escalated to the point where she fears for her physical safety and the emotional well-being of their children. Brianna took the stand with visible trepidation, her voice shaking as she described Derek's increasingly suspicious behavior over the past year. She testified about his invasive questions regarding her schedule, his intimidating demeanor during their last conversation, and her fear that his military training and access to weapons could lead to violence. He told me that people who betray their family deserve consequences, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Coming from a man with his background and capabilities, that felt like a direct threat. Derek watched the performance with professional appreciation. Brianna was hitting every emotional note perfectly, presenting herself as a trapped and terrified wife seeking protection from an unstable husband. If this had been a normal case, her testimony might have been compelling. But Derek had spent months preparing for this moment. Shun called Chloe to the stand, and Derek saw his daughter's internal struggle as she approached the witness box. She had spent the past 3 days agonizing over her father's revelations about the criminal conspiracy, but her mother had convinced her that Derek was exaggerating to manipulate her loyalty. Chloe, Shun began gently, how would you describe the atmosphere in your home over the past year? It was tense. Dad started asking a lot of questions about where Mom was going and what she was doing. He seemed suspicious of everything. Did you ever feel afraid of your father? Chloe hesitated, glancing at Derek before answering. Sometimes when he got that look, like he was analyzing everything and everyone around him. Did you witness the conversation between your parents that led to this hearing? Yes. Dad had pictures and documents, and he was asking Mom questions like she was a criminal or something. It was scary. Derek felt a pang of sadness watching his daughter testify against him. But he also noticed what Shun and Brianna had missed. Chloe was being carefully truthful without fully supporting their narrative. She was describing Derek's behavior without confirming their interpretation of his motives. When Victoria Pine rose for cross-examination, Derek knew the real battle was about to begin. Chloe, during this period, when your father was asking questions about your mother's activities, were there family events that your mother missed? Some, I guess. How many of your brother's baseball games did your mother attend this season? Chloe shifted uncomfortably. I don't know exactly. Cole plays twice a week from March through June. That's approximately 40 games. How many did your mother attend? Maybe 10. What about family dinners? How often was your mother home for dinner in the past 6 months? She was busy with things. What kind of things? Chloe's eyes darted to her mother, then to Judge Holt. Derek could see the moment she realized she was about to be forced to reveal information that would expose the affair. Just personal things, social stuff. Victoria pressed forward. Chloe, Are you aware that your mother has been in a romantic relationship with someone other than your father? Objection! Shun jumped to his feet. Relevance! Judge Holt's face remained impassive, but Derek caught the slight tightening around his eyes. I'll allow it. The nature of any extramarital relationships could be relevant to the allegations of controlling behavior. Answer the question, Chloe. Victoria continued. Do you know about your mother's relationship with another man? The courtroom fell silent. Chloe looked at her mother, at Judge Holt, then at her father. Derek could see her making a decision that would determine the course of the rest of her life. Yes, she whispered. How long have you known about this relationship? About 6 months. Did your mother ask you to help hide this relationship from your father? Chloe's voice was barely audible. Yes. Did you help her create false explanations for her absences from family events? Yes. Victoria Pine turned to face Judge Holt directly. Your Honor, I move to dismiss this petition on the grounds that it constitutes a fraud upon the court, filed for the purpose of obtaining legal protection while committing adultery and possibly other criminal acts. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Shun was on his feet objecting. Brianna was crying, and Judge Holt was struggling to maintain his composure while being directly challenged. Furthermore, Victoria continued, I request that this court recuse itself from these proceedings due to an apparent conflict of interest. What are you suggesting, Counselor? Holt's voice carried a warning. I'm suggesting that this court may have a personal interest in the outcome of these proceedings that prevents impartial judgment. Derek stood slowly, reaching for the manila envelope he'd brought to court, the same envelope that had started this war 6 months earlier, but now containing evidence that would end it. Your Honor, Derek said calmly, I believe there's information the court should review before proceeding further. Judge Holt stared at the envelope as Derek approached the bench. In that moment, everyone in the courtroom understood they were witnessing something more significant than a domestic dispute. Derek handed the envelope to the court clerk, who passed it to Judge Holt. As Holt opened it and began reading, Derek watched the man's face transform from confident authority to barely controlled panic. The envelope contained photographs, financial records, phone transcripts, and a detailed timeline documenting the affair between Brianna and Judge Holt. But more damaging was the evidence of judicial misconduct, documented instances where Holt had used confidential information provided by Brianna to influence case outcomes and political decisions. Most devastating was a recorded conversation between Brianna and Holt where they discussed using Derek's security clearance to obtain classified information that could benefit Holt's political ambitions. Judge Holt's hands shook as he reviewed the evidence. When he looked up, his face was ashen. It was clear that the true consequences of their actions were finally about to be revealed. Your Honor, Brianna's attorney said urgently, my client would like to withdraw her petition. But it was too late. Derek had planned this moment perfectly, ensuring that the evidence would be entered into the public record before anyone could prevent its disclosure. Your Honor, Victoria Pine said formally, I believe this evidence demonstrates clear grounds for criminal charges against both the petitioner and other parties involved in this conspiracy. Judge Holt sat in stunned silence, realizing that his career, his marriage, and his freedom were all about to be destroyed by the man he'd betrayed. The court is in recess, he finally managed, his voice barely steady. As the courtroom cleared, Derek felt no satisfaction, only the cold completion of a mission accomplished. Brianna and Holt had underestimated the consequences of betraying someone who never forgot and never forgave. The war was over, but the reckoning had just begun. Within hours of the hearing, Judge Trevor Holt's world began to collapse. The evidence Derek had presented triggered an immediate investigation by the State Judicial Conduct Board, and by evening, news vans surrounded both Holt's courthouse and his family home. Derek watched the coverage from his apartment, feeling the familiar emptiness that followed completed operations. Victory in war was rarely satisfying. It was simply the absence of defeat. But this victory carried a personal cost that his military missions had never demanded. Cole arrived at Derek's apartment that evening, his face pale and drawn. "Dad, Chloe's at the hospital." Derek was on his feet instantly. "What happened?" "Panic attack. Mom found her in her room, hyperventilating after the news broke about Judge Holt. She couldn't breathe, kept saying it was all her fault." The drive to the hospital was silent, except for Cole's occasional directions. Derek felt the weight of his daughter's collapse pressing against his chest like a physical force. He'd calculated the cost of his revenge in terms of careers, reputations, and criminal prosecutions. He hadn't fully considered the psychological toll on a 16-year-old girl who'd believed she was protecting her mother's happiness. Brianna was in the waiting room when they arrived. Her eyes were red from crying, but still defiant when she saw Derek. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You destroyed our family to satisfy your ego." "I documented the destruction of our family," Derek replied quietly. "I didn't cause it. You could have talked to me. We could have worked something out." Derek studied his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, and saw the same fundamental disconnect that had made her affair possible. Even now, facing criminal charges and public humiliation, she believed the problem was Derek's response to her betrayal rather than the betrayal itself. "Brianna, you spent 6 months lying to me, manipulating our children, and facilitating criminal activity. You chose this path, and now you must face the consequences. You chose to betray our family, and you chose to involve our children in your deception. The responsibility for their pain lies with you, not with me. What conversation did you think would fix that? I was trying to find happiness at the expense of everyone who trusted you." Derek's voice remained level, but Cole could hear the anger beneath his father's control. "At the expense of our marriage, our family, and your own integrity." Dr. Sarah Martinez emerged from the emergency room before Brianna could respond. "Mr. and Mrs. Moss, Chloe is stable, but she's experiencing severe anxiety related to recent family stress. I'd like to keep her overnight for observation." "Can we see her?" Brianna asked. "She's asking for her brother first. She says she needs to tell him something important." Cole disappeared into the emergency room, while Derek and Brianna sat in uncomfortable silence. The waiting room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize the wreckage of their family. "You know they're going to arrest me," Brianna said eventually. "Probably Trevor, too." Derek didn't respond. He'd accomplished what he'd set out to do, but the satisfaction he'd expected was nowhere to be found. "What happens to the kids if I go to prison?" "Cole will be fine. He's strong, and he understands the difference between justice and revenge." "And Chloe?" Derek was quiet for a long moment. "Chloe made choices that had consequences. She'll have to learn to live with those consequences. She's 16 years old, Derek. She was trying to protect me. She was 16 when she chose to help you deceive me. She was 16 when she participated in covering up criminal activity. Age doesn't excuse moral responsibility." Brianna stared at him with something approaching horror. "You really won't forgive her, will you? Your own daughter." "Forgiveness requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing and genuine remorse. Until Chloe understands that what she did was fundamentally wrong, not just unfortunate, but ethically indefensible, there's nothing to forgive. You're going to lose her forever." I lost her the moment she chose to betray my trust to protect your lies." Cole returned from the emergency room with tears in his eyes. "Dad, she wants to see you." Derek found Chloe connected to monitors, her face pale against the white hospital pillows. She looked younger than her 16 years, fragile in a way that made Derek's chest tighten with unwanted emotion. "I'm sorry," she whispered as he approached her bed. "For what?" "For lying, for helping Mom lie, for thinking it was okay because I wanted her to be happy." Her voice broke. "I didn't know about the other stuff, the criminal stuff. I thought it was just romance." Derek sat in the chair beside her bed, studying his daughter's face for signs of genuine understanding versus temporary remorse prompted by consequences. "Chloe, do you understand why what you did was wrong independent of the criminal activity? Because lying is wrong. Because loyalty is a choice, and you chose to be loyal to a lie rather than to truth. Because family trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired." "Can't you forgive me?" she asked, her eyes pleading. "I'm your daughter." Derek was quiet for a long time, wrestling with emotions he'd spent months suppressing. "Chloe, I love you. I will always love you. But love and trust are different things. You taught me that trust, even between family members, must be earned and can be lost. So, you'll never trust me again?" "I don't know. Trust is rebuilt through consistent actions over time, not through apologies after getting caught." Chloe closed her eyes, tears leaking from beneath her lashes. "I've lost you forever, haven't I? You've lost the relationship we had. Whether we can build a different relationship depends on who you choose to become from this point forward." Derek stood to leave, but Chloe's voice stopped him. "Dad, what's going to happen to Mom?" "Your mother will face the consequences of her choices, just like everyone else involved, including you." Derek paused at the door. His daughter's question cut deeper than she probably realized. The truth was that Derek's revenge had cost him everything he'd once valued: his marriage, his family, his home, his peace of mind. He'd won the war and lost his life. "Yes," he said quietly, "including me." As Derek left the hospital, he called Victoria Pine to get an update on the criminal investigations. The state attorney general's office had taken over the case against Judge Holt, and federal prosecutors were reviewing the security clearance violations. Brianna would likely face charges for conspiracy and accessory to judicial misconduct. "What about the divorce proceedings?" Victoria asked. "Full custody of Cole. Chloe can choose when she turns 18. I want supervised visitation only until Brianna's criminal case is resolved. The judge will probably approve that, given the circumstances. What about property division?" Derek looked back at the hospital where his daughter was learning the price of betrayal. "Give her whatever she wants, the house, the savings, everything. I don't want anything that reminds me of what I've lost." That night, Derek sat in his sparse apartment and wondered if revenge was supposed to feel this hollow. He'd destroyed his enemies completely, protected his son's future, and ensured that justice was served. But he'd also destroyed his family, traumatized his daughter, and turned himself into the kind of man who could calculate the emotional devastation of a 16-year-old girl as acceptable collateral damage. Derek Moss had won his war, but the victory tasted like ashes. 3 weeks after the courthouse revelation, the criminal charges came down like dominoes. Judge Trevor Holt was arrested on 14 counts of judicial misconduct, abuse of office, and conspiracy. The State Bar Association suspended his license, pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. His wife filed for divorce the same day, taking their children and half of his assets to her father's estate in another state. Brianna was charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to criminal misconduct. Her arrest made the local news, with footage of her being led away in handcuffs that Derek watched with clinical detachment. She'd posted bail using money from their joint savings account. Money Derek could have prevented her from accessing but chose not to. Even in victory, he felt no need for petty cruelties. The media coverage was extensive, but focused primarily on Holt's fall from grace. The story of a respected judge brought down by corruption and betrayal captured public attention. While Derek managed to maintain relative anonymity as the security consultant whose intelligence work exposed the conspiracy, Cole adapted to their new reality with the resilience Derek had hoped for. The teenager moved into Derek's apartment without complaint, transferring to a new school district and maintaining his grades despite the upheaval. He visited his mother twice a week under court-supervised arrangements, conversations that grew shorter and more strained with each encounter. Chloe was a different story. Released from the hospital after a 3-day stay, she'd moved in with Brianna's sister while awaiting the outcome of her mother's trial. She refused to see Derek, declined his calls, and sent back his letters unopened. Her therapist, court-appointed as part of the custody arrangement, reported that Chloe blamed Derek entirely for the family's destruction and showed no understanding of her own role in the deception. She's constructed a narrative where you're the villain who destroyed an innocent romance, Dr. Martinez explained during one of Derek's mandatory co-parenting sessions. It's psychologically easier for her to maintain that story than to confront her own moral compromises. Will she ever understand what actually happened? Possibly, but not until she's mature enough to accept responsibility for her choices. That could take years if it happens at all. Derek accepted this prognosis with the same stoic resignation he'd applied to military casualties. Some losses were permanent, and dwelling on them served no tactical purpose. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, given the criminal circumstances. Derek's evidence of betrayal and criminal conspiracy made Brianna's position untenable, and her attorney advised accepting Derek's generous settlement offer rather than fighting for terms she was unlikely to receive. Derek kept minimal assets, his business, his personal belongings, and a small apartment. He signed over the house, the savings accounts, and even his share of future business earnings to Brianna. Victoria Pine called the settlement financial suicide, but Derek had no interest in profiting from the wreckage of his family. You're giving her enough money to rebuild her life, Victoria pointed out. Good, the children will benefit from her financial stability. Even though she betrayed you? Derek considered the question. As he stood in the quiet of his apartment, he realized that some parts of himself, the idealist, the family man, the one who believed in unconditional forgiveness, were gone. What remained was a man who understood sacrifice, loss, and the enduring consequences of his choices. Revenge was never about money, Victoria. It was about consequences and justice. The financial penalty isn't what destroyed Brianna. The criminal charges and public humiliation did that. The money is irrelevant. 6 weeks after the courthouse hearing, Derek received an unexpected visitor. Trevor Holt appeared at his office looking haggard and desperate. The former judge had lost weight, his expensive suits replaced by rumpled casual clothes, and his once confident demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. "I need to talk to you," Holt said, pushing past Derek's secretary into the private office. Derek studied his former client with professional interest. About what? About a deal, about making this go away. The criminal charges. Those aren't mine to dismiss. Holt began pacing frantically. You orchestrated this entire thing. You planned it from the beginning, didn't you? The security consulting, the access to information, even encouraging me to make those decisions. You set me up." Derek felt a cold satisfaction at Holt's realization. "I provided you with information. You chose how to use it. You knew I would use it inappropriately. You were counting on it. I suspected you lacked the ethical foundation to resist temptation. I was right." Holt stopped pacing and faced Derek directly. "I can destroy you too. I can testify that you deliberately provided classified information, knowing it would be misused. I can make you an accessory to everything I'm charged with." Derek opened his desk drawer and withdrew a digital recorder. "This conversation is being recorded, Mr. Holt. Are you threatening to commit perjury in exchange for my assistance in your criminal case?" Holt's face went white. Even in desperation, he was smart enough to realize he had just confessed to planning false testimony while being recorded. "You jerk. You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I've planned for likely contingencies. Your desperation and willingness to commit additional wrongdoing was predictable." Holt collapsed into a chair, his fight leaving him all at once. "Why? Why destroy everything? You could have just divorced Brianna quietly. You could have moved on with your life." Derek considered how to explain something that Holt would never understand. "Because some violations are unforgivable. Because trust, once broken, can never be repaired. Because actions have consequences, and those consequences must be proportional to the betrayal. So you destroyed my career, my marriage, my reputation, my freedom, all because I was with your wife?" "No, I documented your crimes and exposed your corruption. The betrayal was just the catalyst that revealed your true character." Derek stood and walked to his office window, looking out at the city where he'd built and lost everything that mattered to him. "You see, Mr. Holt, you made the same mistake Brianna made. You assumed that because I seemed stable and predictable, I was also passive and forgiving. You confused patience with weakness. I never meant for it to go this far. Of course not. People like you never consider the long-term consequences of your actions. You live in a world of immediate gratification and assume everyone else will adjust to accommodate your choices." Derek turned back to face the broken man in his office. "But some people don't adjust, Mr. Holt. Some people remember every slight, document every betrayal, and plan every response. You crossed one of those people, and now you're learning what that costs." Holt left without another word, and Derek never saw him again. The former judge would eventually plead guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more damaging evidence. He received 3 years in federal prison and a lifetime ban from practicing law. That evening, Derek had dinner with Cole at their apartment. A quiet meal of takeout Chinese food eaten while discussing Cole's plans for college and his upcoming baseball season. It was a peaceful moment that reminded Derek why he'd fought so hard to protect this one remaining relationship. "Dad," Cole said as they cleaned up, "do you ever regret what you did?" Derek thought about Chloe in therapy, about Brianna facing prison, about the comfortable life they'd all shared before betrayal had poisoned everything. "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally. "But I don't regret the choice I made when it became necessary." Even losing Chloe. Some prices are worth paying to preserve your integrity and protect the people who deserve protection. Cole nodded, understanding his father's philosophy, even if he couldn't fully embrace it. "Will you be okay? After everything?" Derek looked at his son, the one person who'd remained loyal when loyalty mattered most, and felt something like peace. "I'll be fine, Cole. I always am." 8 months after the courthouse revelation, Derek's new life had settled into a routine of calculated isolation. His security consulting business had actually grown, with clients impressed by the thoroughness of his intelligence work and his reputation for absolute discretion. He worked longer hours, traveled more frequently, and maintained minimal personal connections outside of his relationship with Cole. The criminal trials had concluded with predictable results. Trevor Holt was serving his federal sentence at a minimum security facility. His political career was permanently destroyed, and his family permanently estranged. Brianna had received 18 months in state prison, followed by community service, a sentence reduced due to her cooperation with prosecutors and her status as a first-time offender. Derek had attended neither trial, though he provided extensive testimony through depositions that were played for the juries. He felt no need to witness their public humiliation. The verdicts were foregone conclusions based on evidence he'd gathered over months of careful planning. Life, though quiet, moved forward with a sense of finality and the faintest glimmer of hope for something better. Chloe took a slow breath, her eyes shining with the effort of processing the truth. I think I do now. I think I finally get that. It doesn't matter how much you love someone. If you're helping them hurt other people, it's not really love, it's just selfishness. It's not fair to ask someone to keep a secret that's hurting other people. Derek nodded, sensing real growth for the first time in his daughter's words. That's what trust and loyalty really mean, Chloe. It's about protecting each other, not causing harm, especially not to the people we claim to love the most. She met his gaze, eyes brimming with remorse. I'm sorry, Dad. Not just for lying, but for blaming you for everything that happened. I know it's too late to go back to how things were. Derek considered her carefully, seeing both the guilt and the brave vulnerability that comes with owning a painful mistake. You can't go back, he said gently, but you can go forward. You can decide who you want to be from here, and you can rebuild trust through honesty and effort, if you choose to. Chloe nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I want to try. I want to do better. I don't want to be that kind of person anymore. For the first time in a long while, Derek felt the faintest hope that one piece of his shattered family might heal. He didn't reach out to embrace her, but the acceptance in his expression was unmistakable. In that moment, both father and daughter understood that forgiveness was not a simple act, but a lifelong process, and they had finally taken the first real step toward it. She may not ever admit responsibility, but she'll find a way to move forward. Whether she learns anything from all this, that's up to her. You, on the other hand, have the chance to make different choices now. What you do with that chance is entirely in your hands. Chloe hesitated at the doorway, wiping at her tears. Thank you for being honest. I'm going to try to show you who I am now. I can't expect anything from you, but I hope someday you'll see I've changed. Derek gave her a small nod, a flicker of cautious hope in his gaze. Change takes time, Chloe. Just keep doing the right thing. You'll never regret it. She managed a trembling smile before slipping out, leaving Derek alone in the quiet office. He watched the city lights outside, wrestling with the pain and the faintest sense of relief. For all he'd lost, for all he'd sacrificed, perhaps there was still something left worth building. Step by careful step, with eyes wide open and trust hard-won. In that unresolved, uncertain moment, Derek Moss allowed himself to imagine that healing wasn't impossible, even if it would never be simple. And he resolved to try, one honest day at a time. Whether she'll be genuinely okay depends on whether she learns anything from the consequences of her choices. Do you hate her? Chloe asked. Derek considered the question carefully. No. Hate requires emotional investment I'm no longer willing to make. I'm indifferent to your mother's future beyond its impact on you and Cole. After Chloe left, Derek sat in his office thinking about forgiveness, redemption, and the possibility of rebuilding relationships on new foundations. He'd meant what he'd told his daughter. Trust could potentially be rebuilt, but only through consistent actions over time. The question was whether Chloe had the strength and consistency to earn back what she'd thrown away. Derek suspected the answer would take years to determine. But for the first time since discovering Brianna's affair, Derek felt something like hope that his family might eventually include more than just Cole. It was a fragile hope, carefully guarded against disappointment, but it was hope nonetheless. That evening, Derek called Cole to tell him about Chloe's visit. His son listened without comment, then asked a single question. "Do you think she's really changed?" "I think she's trying to change. Whether she succeeds is a different question." "Are you going to give her another chance?" Derek thought about his daughter's tears, her apparent remorse, and the long road ahead for any potential reconciliation. "I'm going to give her the opportunity to earn another chance. That's all anyone gets from me now." It was, Derek realized, probably all anyone deserved. 2 years after the courthouse revelation, Derek Moss had achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish in his war against betrayal. His enemies were destroyed, justice had been served, and his principles remained intact. But as he sat in his new office, larger and more successful than before, he wondered if victory was supposed to feel this empty. Brianna had been released from prison after serving 14 months, emerging into a world where her reputation was permanently damaged and her social circle had evaporated. She'd found work as a receptionist at a dental office, living in a small apartment across town and struggling to rebuild any semblance of the life she'd once taken for granted. The financial settlement Derek had provided kept her from destitution, but couldn't restore the status and connections she'd lost. Trevor Holt remained in federal prison, his appeals exhausted, and his former life completely erased. His ex-wife had remarried and moved to another state, taking their children and ensuring Holt would remain permanently estranged from his family. The man who'd once wielded judicial power now worked in the prison library, his legal expertise as worthless as his reputation. Derek's relationship with Chloe had slowly evolved from hostile arrangement to cautious cooperation. Derek answered quietly, "I have nothing to say to the dead, and less to the living who stood by his choices. There is nothing left to mourn except the consequences we all must live with." After ending the call, Derek sat in his dimly lit living room, the night pressing against the windows. He thought about Mercy, how it had always seemed like a weakness in a world of high stakes and calculated moves. All his life, he had trusted in structure, loyalty, and the belief that the truth, once revealed, could set things right. But in the aftermath, what remained was a quieter, lonelier order. His children were making their own way in the world. Chloe, with her determined search for redemption. Cole, embracing a future free from the ghosts of betrayal. Brianna, once at the center of his universe, was now just another name in a list of lessons learned the hard way. Derek understood now that the greatest victories sometimes came with the highest personal costs. Principles could be defended. Justice could be won. But at the end, what lingered was not triumph, but the sober knowledge of who you became in the process. Standing at his window, Derek Moss watched the city lights flicker, each one a reminder of the complexity of people, the impermanence of trust, and the price paid for a clear conscience. Tomorrow would come, as it always did, and he would face it as he had survived everything else, widowed of illusion, wary, but not without hope that, one day, peace might arrive to soften the edges of his hard-earned truth. He felt hope. It wasn't the naive, easy hope of his earlier life, but a cautious, deliberate kind of hope. the sort that comes after hard-won understanding and years of pain. It was the hope that relationships, once shattered, could be rebuilt into something honest, even if the innocence could never return. It was the hope that a family broken by betrayal might, in time and with effort, discover a new kind of unity. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Derek watched the city lights with a new sense of acceptance. His future would be shaped by choices made in darkness, as well as by those made in the light. He had lost much and sacrificed more, but he had not lost the possibility of redemption. For himself, for his daughter, and perhaps in time for his family. There would always be scars, and some wounds would never fully heal. But as long as there was willingness to face the truth, to try again, and to rebuild trust day by day, there was also the chance for peace. And so, for the first time in a long while, Derek Moss allowed hope to settle gently beside him, a fragile but welcome visitor in the quiet of his hard-won life. The possibility that family relationships could be rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect rather than unconditional love. It wasn't the same as forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't the same as forgetting. But it was something. Derek Moss had won his war against betrayal, but the victory had cost him the capacity for the kind of trust that made war unnecessary. He'd preserved his principles at the expense of his ability to love without reservation. He protected his integrity by becoming someone who could destroy the people who threatened it. The price of victory was becoming the kind of man who could win such wars. Derek wasn't sure if that made him strong or broken, but he was certain it made him safe. And after everything he'd lost and everything he'd learned, safety was the only prize that mattered. As Derek prepared for bed that night, he thought about the envelope that had started this war, the thin manila folder that had contained the evidence of his family's betrayal. That envelope had been both the catalyst and the weapon that destroyed his enemies and transformed his life. Some victories, Derek realized, were indistinguishable from defeats, but they were still victories. And for a man who'd learned that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, victory was enough. Derek Moss slept peacefully that night, surrounded by the silence of a life rebuilt on principles that would never again be compromised by love, loyalty, or hope. It was a cold peace, but it was peace nonetheless. The war was over. Derek had won. And if the cost of winning was becoming someone who could never again lose such a war, then that was a price he was willing to pay forever.